The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Kate adjusted her modest dress one final time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the crisp autumn air, but from the weight of what lay ahead. At 23, she had never imagined she would find herself walking toward the grand palace doors, carrying a leather satchel that contained documents capable of changing the course of an entire nation. Kate had grown up in the countryside, the daughter of a blacksmith who taught her to read when most girls her age were learning only domestic skills. Her father believed knowledge was the greatest gift he could give his daughter, though he never suspected it would one day place her in the path of royalty. The village where she spent her childhood was quiet, unremarkable, filled with hard-working people who kept their heads down and asked few questions about the affairs of those who ruled them. Everything changed the day the tax collectors arrived, with demands that seemed impossible to meet. The harvest had been poor, and families were already struggling to put food on their tables, yet the crown demanded payments that would leave entire households destitute. Kate watched as her neighbors sold their belongings, their livestock, even their children's future prospects to satisfy debts they could barely comprehend. Unlike others in her village, Kate possessed something rare, the ability to read the official documents that accompanied these demands. As she studied the papers by candlelight, she discovered discrepancies that made her heart race. The amounts being collected far exceeded what was legally required. Someone in the royal administration was skimming profits, using forged signatures and falsified records to line their own pockets while blaming the crown for the excessive burden. Kate spent weeks gathering evidence, traveling secretly between villages to compare documents and testimonies. She discovered a network of corruption that reached deep into the royal treasury. Mid-level officials had been systematically overcharging citizens for years, keeping detailed records of their theft while maintaining perfect public facades. The proof was overwhelming, but Kate faced an impossible dilemma. How could a blacksmith's daughter from an insignificant village approach the sovereign with accusations against trusted court officials? The answer came through Father Benedict, the village priest who had helped educate Kate in her youth. He possessed connections within the church hierarchy that extended to the royal court. Through careful negotiations and vouching for Kate's character, he arranged for her to present her findings directly to the sovereign. The meeting would take place during the morning audience, when citizens could petition the crown for justice. As Kate approached the palace that morning, she carried with her not just evidence of corruption, but the hopes of countless families who had suffered in silence. The leather satchel contained meticulously organized documents, witness statements, and financial records that painted a clear picture of systematic theft. She had rehearsed her presentation countless times, knowing she would have only minutes to make her case before being dismissed. The palace guards scrutinized her carefully, their expressions suggesting they found it unusual for someone of her humble appearance to request an audience. Kate's dress, though clean and carefully mended, marked her clearly as a commoner. Her calloused hands and sun-weathered face told the story of a life spent in honest labor, far removed from the silk and powder of court society. Yet she carried herself with quiet dignity, her spine straight and her gaze steady. Inside the palace walls, Kate was overwhelmed by opulence she had never imagined. Marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers, and tapestries depicting great battles and royal victories covered the walls. Courtiers in elaborate dress moved through the corridors like exotic birds, their conversations conducted in whispers and glances. Kate felt profoundly out of place, yet she reminded herself that her purpose transcended social boundaries. The waiting chamber filled with other petitioners, each clutching their own hopes for royal intervention. There were merchants seeking trade agreements, nobles requesting land grants, and citizens like herself seeking justice for various grievances. Kate observed them carefully, noting the confidence of those accustomed to court proceedings versus the nervous energy of those, like herself, who had never before approached the throne. As the morning wore on, Kate's name was finally called. She gathered her satchel and walked toward the audience chamber, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The massive doors swung open to reveal a scene that would remain etched in her memory forever. The sovereign seated upon an ornate throne, surrounded by advisors and court officials, some of whom Kate suspected were involved in the very corruption she was about to expose. The throne room fell silent as Kate entered, her simple leather shoes making soft sounds against the polished marble floor. The sovereign, a figure she had only heard described in whispered conversations, sat elevated above the assembled court. Kate had expected someone intimidating, perhaps cold and distant, but the ruler's eyes held a warmth that surprised her. Still, the weight of protocol and centuries of tradition pressed down upon her shoulders as she approached the designated spot where petitioners were to present their cases. Court officials flanked the throne, their elaborate robes and stern expressions creating an atmosphere of formality that made Kate acutely aware of her humble origins. Among them, she recognized faces from the documents in her satchel, men whose signatures appeared on the falsified tax records whose seals had authorized the excessive collections that had devastated her village and countless others. The irony was not lost on her that she was about to accuse these very individuals while standing in their presence. The herald announced her name and village, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. Kate felt dozens of eyes upon her, some curious, others dismissive. She could sense the court's expectation that this would be yet another routine petition from a provincial subject, easily addressed with a few words, and quickly forgotten. None of them suspected that the young woman before them carried evidence that would shake the foundations of their comfortable world. When given permission to speak, Kate's voice initially wavered, but she quickly found her strength. She began, not with accusations, but with a simple description of life in her village. The hard-working families, the modest harvests, the children who went to bed hungry despite their parents' best efforts. She painted a picture of honest people struggling under burdens they could not understand, taxes that seemed to increase without explanation or mercy. The sovereign leaned forward slightly, seeming genuinely interested in Kate's account. This was not the typical petition requesting personal favors or special privileges, but rather a window into the lives of subjects whose struggles rarely reached the throne room. Kate sensed this attention and pressed forward, describing how she had first noticed the discrepancies in the tax documents, how her father's gift of literacy had enabled her to see what others could not. As Kate began to present specific evidence, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She carefully removed documents from her satchel, explaining how she had compared official tax demands across multiple villages, discovering patterns that revealed systematic overcharging. Her voice grew stronger as she detailed her findings, presenting witness statements and financial records with the precision of a trained accountant rather than a blacksmith's daughter. Several court officials began to shift uncomfortably, their faces betraying concern as Kate's presentation continued. She noted their reactions but pressed on, methodically building her case. The sovereign's expression had grown serious, and the ruler's advisors were exchanging worried glances. Kate realized that her evidence was not just convincing, it was undeniable. The moment of greatest tension arrived when Kate named specific officials involved in the corruption scheme. She did so respectfully but firmly, presenting forged signatures and falsified seals as evidence of their crimes. The accused men stepped forward to protest their innocence, their voices raised in indignation. They pointed to Kate's humble origins, questioning how a village girl could possibly understand complex administrative procedures. But Kate was prepared for their objections. She had anticipated every argument they might raise and had evidence to counter each claim. When they suggested she had misunderstood the documents, she quoted specific legal statutes that governed tax collection. When they implied she was motivated, By personal grievance, she presented evidence from villages where she had no connections. Her preparation was thorough, her logic unassailable. The sovereign called for silence, studying the documents Kate had presented with careful attention. The throne room held its breath as the ruler examined signature after signature, comparing official seals with known examples, reviewing the mathematical calculations that revealed the scope of the theft. Minutes passed in absolute quiet, broken only by the rustle of papers and the soft footsteps of royal advisors moving closer to examine the evidence. Kate watched the sovereign's face as understanding dawned. She saw the moment when the ruler grasped not just the technical details of the corruption, but its human cost. The overcharges had not simply enriched dishonest officials, they had impoverished families, forced children into labor, destroyed the livelihoods of honest citizens who had trusted their government to treat them fairly. The weight of revelation settled over the throne room like a heavy blanket. Kate had done more than expose corruption. She had revealed a betrayal of the sacred trust between ruler and subjects. The sovereign's advisors, those not implicated in the scheme, began to whisper urgently among themselves, discussing the implications of Kate's discoveries. The accused officials stood frozen, their earlier protests dying away as the evidence mounted against them. In that moment of profound silence, Kate realized that her simple act of seeking justice had accomplished something far greater. She had not just presented evidence of wrongdoing, she had demonstrated that truth could emerge from the most unexpected sources, that wisdom and courage could arise from humble circumstances, and that the voice of a single citizen could resonate through the halls of power when spoken with conviction and supported by irrefutable facts. The sovereign's hands moved deliberately through Kate's documents, each page revealing new layers of the corruption scheme. The silence in the throne room had become almost unbearable, broken only by the soft rustling of papers and the occasional, sharp intake of breath from court officials who were beginning to grasp the magnitude of what had been uncovered. Kate stood motionless, her heart pounding as she watched the most powerful person in the realm absorb the evidence she had risked everything to present. What struck the sovereign most profoundly was not just the scope of the theft, but the meticulous care with which Kate had documented every detail. Here was a young woman with no formal training in law or administration, yet she had assembled a case that would have impressed the most seasoned legal scholars. Her witness statements were carefully cross-referenced, her financial calculations were precise, and her legal citations were accurate. The sovereign realized that this was not the work of someone seeking revenge or attention, but of a person driven by an unshakable commitment to justice. The accused officials made one final attempt to discredit Kate's evidence, suggesting that the documents might have been forged or manipulated. But the sovereign called for the royal seal keeper, an elderly man whose lifetime of service had made him an expert in detecting fraudulent documents. Under his examination, every piece of evidence Kate had presented proved authentic. The signatures were genuine, the seals were real, and the mathematical discrepancies were exactly as she had calculated. As the truth became undeniable, Kate noticed something remarkable happening in the throne room. The sovereign's initial surprise had transformed into something deeper, a profound sadness mixed with righteous anger. Here was a ruler who had genuinely believed in the integrity of the administration, only to discover that trusted officials had been systematically betraying that trust. The personal dimension of the betrayal seemed to affect the sovereign as much as its impact on the citizenry. The sovereign began to ask Kate detailed questions about her investigation, probing not just the facts, but the methods she had used to uncover them. Kate explained how she had taught herself to recognize different types of official seals, how she had learned to spot alterations in documents, and how she had built networks of communication between villages to gather comprehensive evidence. Her answers revealed a sharp intellect and natural investigative instincts that impressed everyone in the room. During this questioning, Kate made a request that surprised the entire court. Rather than asking for personal reward or recognition, she requested that the sovereign establish a system for citizens to report suspected corruption directly to the crown, bypassing the very officials who might be involved in wrongdoing. She proposed that trusted individuals in each region be appointed to investigate citizen complaints and report directly to royal oversight committees. Her focus remained entirely on preventing future abuses rather than seeking personal gain. The sovereign was visibly moved by Kate's selflessness and the practical wisdom of her suggestions. Here was someone who had solved a complex problem not for personal benefit, but out of genuine concern for her fellow citizens. The ruler began to see Kate not as a simple petitioner, but as a valuable advisor whose insights could help strengthen the entire kingdom's governance. As the audience continued, other court members began to contribute their own observations about irregularities they had noticed but not previously understood. Kate's revelations had opened a floodgate of recognition, as various officials recalled suspicious patterns they had dismissed or overlooked. The corruption network was even more extensive than Kate had initially suspected, reaching into multiple departments and affecting regions throughout the kingdom. The sovereign made several immediate decisions that demonstrated the profound impact of Kate's presentation. First, the accused officials were to be immediately suspended pending a full investigation. Second, emergency relief would be provided to the villages that had been overcharged, with funds to be recovered from the personal assets of the corrupt officials. Third, Kate's proposed oversight system would be implemented immediately, with her serving as an advisor in its development. But perhaps most significantly, the sovereign publicly acknowledged that Kate's courage and dedication had prevented a crisis that could have undermined the stability of the entire realm. Had the corruption continued unchecked, it might have eventually sparked widespread rebellion or economic collapse. By coming forward when she did, Kate had not only saved countless families from further suffering, but had also protected the kingdom itself from potential disaster. The transformation in the throne room was palpable. What had begun as a routine audience had become a moment of genuine revelation and reform. Court officials who had initially viewed Kate with condescension now looked at her with respect and, in some cases, awe. The sovereign's advisors were already discussing the implementation of Kate's suggestions, recognizing their practical value and moral necessity. As the formal audience drew to a close, Kate felt a profound sense of relief mixed with amazement at what had transpired. She had entered the palace that morning as an unknown village woman carrying dangerous accusations. She was leaving as someone who had fundamentally changed how the kingdom would be governed, whose voice had reached not just the sovereign's ears, but the sovereign's heart, inspiring reforms that would protect future generations of citizens from the suffering she had witnessed in her own community. The sovereign rose from the throne, a gesture so unexpected that the entire court fell into even deeper silence. In centuries of tradition, rulers remained seated during audiences, maintaining the formal distance that protocol demanded. But Kate's revelations had shattered more than just a corruption scheme. They had broken through the barriers that typically separated crown from subject, creating a moment of genuine human connection that transcended royal ceremony. Walking down from the elevated platform, the sovereign approached Kate directly, carrying several of the documents she had presented. The court watched in amazement as their ruler examined the evidence at eye level with the young woman who had brought it forward. This simple act communicated more powerfully than any proclamation that Kate's contribution was being taken with the utmost seriousness and respect. The sovereign began to speak, not in the formal language typically used for official pronouncements, but in words that carried personal conviction and emotional weight. The ruler acknowledged that Kate's courage had exposed not just criminal behavior, but fundamental flaws in how the kingdom was administered. More importantly, her approach to the problem had demonstrated qualities of wisdom, integrity, and selflessness that were rare even among the highest nobles and most educated advisors. Kate listened as the sovereign outlined the immediate steps that would be taken to address the corruption she had uncovered. Royal investigators would be dispatched to every affected village within the week, armed with authority to examine all tax records and interview citizens who had been overcharged. The stolen funds would be calculated precisely and returned to their rightful owners, with interest to compensate for the hardship caused by their theft. But the sovereign's response extended far beyond addressing the immediate crisis. Kate's suggestion for a citizen oversight system would be implemented as a permanent reform, fundamentally changing how the kingdom monitored its own administration. Citizens would have direct access to royal oversight committees, bypassing local officials who might have personal interests in concealing wrongdoing. This represented a revolutionary shift in governance philosophy, placing trust in ordinary subjects to help maintain the integrity of their government. The sovereign then made an announcement that shocked everyone present, including Kate herself. The ruler requested that Kate remain at court as a special advisor, helping to design and implement the new oversight system she had proposed. This was unprecedented. Never before had someone of such humble origins been elevated so directly to a position of royal counsel based solely on merit and moral courage. Kate's immediate reaction was one of overwhelming uncertainty. The idea of leaving her village, her family, and the simple life she had always known filled her with anxiety. She had never imagined herself in a position of such responsibility, and the prospect of navigating court politics while maintaining her principles seemed daunting. Yet she also recognized that this opportunity would allow her to help far more people than she could ever assist from her village. The sovereign seemed to understand Kate's internal struggle and addressed it directly. The ruler assured her that she would not be expected to abandon her roots or transform into someone she was not. Instead, her value lay precisely in her authentic perspective as someone who understood the real-world impact of governmental decisions on ordinary citizens. Her role would be to ensure that the crown never again lost touch with the needs and experiences of its subjects. After several moments of careful consideration, Kate made her decision. She would accept the position, but with specific conditions that demonstrated her continued commitment to her original principles. She requested permission to return regularly to her village and others like it, maintaining direct contact with the people whose interests she would be representing. She also asked that her new role include the authority to investigate any citizen complaints personally, ensuring that her oversight work would be hands-on rather than merely administrative. The sovereign agreed to these conditions without hesitation, recognizing that they were entirely consistent with the integrity Kate had already demonstrated. The ruler also announced that Kate would be provided with a team of investigators and clerks to assist in her work, along with the resources necessary to travel throughout the kingdom and communicate directly with citizens in even the most remote areas. The transformation of Kate's status was formalized with remarkable speed. Within hours, she was provided with appropriate clothing for her new role, though she insisted on maintaining a style that reflected her origins rather than adopting the elaborate fashions of established court members. She was assigned quarters within the palace complex, but also given permission to maintain her family home in the village as a base for her fieldwork. News of Kate's appointment spread through the court and beyond with extraordinary rapidity. Some nobles expressed skepticism about elevating someone of such humble origins to a position of influence, but others recognized the wisdom of bringing fresh perspectives into the royal advisory system. Among the common people, word of Kate's success inspired hope that their concerns might finally receive genuine attention from those in power. The sovereign's decision to embrace Kate's proposals and elevate her to a position of authority represented more than just a response to her specific revelations about corruption. It demonstrated a fundamental shift in how the kingdom would be governed, moving toward a more inclusive and responsive system that valued merit over birth, integrity over connections, and practical wisdom over theoretical knowledge. As the day ended, Kate found herself in a position she could never have imagined that morning. She had entered the palace as a petitioner seeking justice for her village and was ending it as a royal advisor with the power to reform how an entire kingdom protected the rights and interests of its citizens. The weeks following Kate's appointment brought changes that rippled throughout the kingdom like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Her first official act was to return to her home village, not as the simple blacksmith's daughter who had left, but as a royal advisor with the authority to right the wrongs she had uncovered. The villagers could hardly believe the transformation, gathering in the town square to hear her explain what had transpired at court and what it would mean for their future. Kate's homecoming was emotional for everyone involved. Her father, the blacksmith who had taught her to read against all social conventions, wept openly as she described how his gift of literacy had enabled her to save not just their village, but countless others throughout the realm. Her neighbors, who had watched her grow from a curious child into a determined young woman, now saw her as living proof that courage and integrity could triumph over corruption and injustice. But Kate was careful not to let the celebration overshadow the serious work that lay ahead. She had returned with a team of royal investigators and a mandate to ensure that every stolen coin was accounted for and returned. The process of calculating exact amounts owed to each family was complex, requiring detailed examination of years of tax records and careful interviews with citizens who had often kept poor records of their payments. The work revealed the full scope of the corruption scheme's impact on individual lives. Families had sold livestock they could not afford to lose. Children had been withdrawn from apprenticeships because their parents could not pay the fees, and elderly citizens had gone without medicine to meet tax demands that were illegally inflated. Kate documented each story carefully, understanding that behind every financial calculation was a human cost that could never be fully compensated. As Kate traveled from village to village throughout the kingdom, she began to implement the oversight system she had proposed to the sovereign. In each community, she established local oversight committees composed of trusted citizens who could investigate complaints and communicate directly with the royal administration. These committees were given clear authority and resources, along with protection from retaliation by local officials who might resent the scrutiny. The establishment of these committees created a fundamental shift in the relationship between citizens and their government. For the first time, ordinary people had a direct channel to report problems and seek justice without having to navigate through potentially corrupt local authorities. Kate trained each committee carefully, teaching them to recognize signs of official misconduct and providing them with the tools and knowledge necessary to document evidence effectively. Kate's work was not without challenges and resistance. Some established court officials resented her rapid rise to influence and questioned whether someone of her background could truly understand the complexities of governance. A few attempted to undermine her authority by suggesting that her reforms were too radical or would create chaos in the administrative system. But Kate's approach to these challenges demonstrated the same wisdom she had shown in her original investigation. Rather than responding to criticism with defensiveness or anger, she invited skeptics to accompany her on visits to affected villages, where they could see firsthand the positive impact of her reforms. Many of her initial critics became supporters after witnessing how the new oversight systems were improving citizens' lives and strengthening rather than weakening effective governance. The sovereign's support for Kate's work never wavered, particularly as the results of her reforms became increasingly apparent. Tax collection became more efficient and fair, citizen complaints decreased dramatically, and public trust in the royal administration grew stronger than it had been in generations. Kate's success validated the ruler's decision to embrace radical change and demonstrated that effective governance could emerge from unexpected sources. Perhaps most remarkably, Kate's reforms began to create a culture of accountability that extended beyond the specific corruption issues she had originally uncovered. Officials throughout the kingdom, knowing that citizens now had effective means to report misconduct, began to hold themselves to higher standards. The threat of exposure and punishment combined with positive recognition for honest service, transformed the behavior of many who might previously have been tempted by corrupt practices. Kate also established a training program for young people from various backgrounds who showed aptitude for investigative work and commitment to public service. She recognized that lasting reform required building a new generation of administrators who shared her values of integrity and service. These trainees would eventually staff the oversight committees and royal investigation teams, ensuring that the reforms would continue long after Kate's own service ended. The personal cost of Kate's transformation was significant. She had given up the simple life she had once enjoyed, taking on responsibilities that required constant travel, complex decision-making, and navigation of political challenges she was still learning to understand. Yet, she found deep satisfaction in the knowledge that her work was making a real difference in people's lives, preventing the kind of suffering she had witnessed in her own community. As months passed, Kate's reputation spread beyond the kingdom's borders. Other rulers began to seek her advice on establishing similar oversight systems in their own realms. Scholars visited to study her methods, and her reforms became a model for governance innovation throughout the region. The blacksmith's daughter, who had simply wanted justice for her village, had become a figure of international significance, proving that transformative leadership could emerge from the most humble beginnings. 5 years after Kate first lowered her head in that hushed throne room, the kingdom had been fundamentally transformed. The woman who had once trembled before approaching the palace doors now walked its halls with quiet confidence. Her simple dress replaced by the practical attire of someone who spent equal time in royal chambers and village squares. Yet, despite her elevated position and growing influence, Kate remained essentially unchanged in her core values and unwavering commitment to justice. The citizen oversight system Kate had proposed had evolved into a sophisticated network that connected every corner of the kingdom. Local committees had uncovered dozens of smaller corruption schemes, prevented countless abuses of power, and created a culture where public service was viewed as a sacred trust rather than an opportunity for personal enrichment. The system had proven so effective that neighboring kingdoms had sent delegations to study its implementation and adapt it to their own needs. Kate's influence extended far beyond the specific reforms she had initiated. Her success had inspired a new generation of young people, particularly women, to believe that their voices could matter regardless of their social origins. Schools throughout the kingdom began teaching literacy more broadly, recognizing that an educated citizenry was essential for maintaining the kind of government accountability Kate had demonstrated. Her story became part of the curriculum, showing children that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when motivated by justice and armed with knowledge. The sovereign, now deeply committed to the principles Kate had introduced, had formally codified many of her reforms into permanent law. The right of citizens to petition oversight committees was enshrined in the kingdom's constitution, ensuring that future rulers could not simply abandon the system. Kate had played a crucial role in drafting this legislation, drawing on her years of practical experience to create legal frameworks that would protect citizens' rights while maintaining governmental efficiency. Kate's relationship with the sovereign had evolved into something unprecedented in the kingdom's history, a genuine partnership between ruler and advisor based on mutual respect and shared commitment to just governance. The sovereign regularly sought Kate's counsel on major decisions, valuing her unique perspective as someone who understood both the needs of common citizens and the complexities of administration. Their collaboration had produced numerous innovations in governance that improved the lives of subjects while strengthening the kingdom's stability. The personal cost of Kate's transformation had been significant, but she had found ways to maintain connections to her roots while fulfilling her expanded responsibilities. She married a fellow reformer she had met during her travels, someone who shared her values and supported her demanding career. Together, they established a home that served as both a private sanctuary and a meeting place for those working too. expand governmental accountability throughout the region. Kate's father, the blacksmith who had taught her to read, lived to see his daughter's achievements recognized not just within their kingdom, but throughout the known world. Before his death, he expressed pride not in her titles or influence, but in her unwavering commitment to using her abilities in service of others. His funeral was attended by villagers and nobles alike, a testament to how Kate's success had bridged social divisions while honoring the humble values that had shaped her character. The corruption network Kate had originally exposed had been completely dismantled, with stolen funds returned to affected families and the guilty officials facing appropriate consequences. But more importantly, the systematic changes she had implemented made it far more difficult for similar schemes to develop and go undetected. The kingdom's financial systems had become more transparent, its administrative procedures more accountable, and its culture more committed to ethical governance. Kate's story had spread far beyond the kingdom's borders, inspiring reform movements in distant lands where citizens faced their own struggles with corruption and injustice. Scholars wrote treatises on her methods, diplomats studied her reforms, and common people drew courage from her example. She had become a symbol of the possibility that individuals could change systems, that justice could prevail over privilege, and that wisdom could emerge from unexpected sources. As Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her from village obscurity to international recognition, she remained most proud of the practical impact her work had achieved. Families that had once struggled under unjust tax burdens now prospered in their honest labor. Children who might have been forced into premature employment now attended schools and learned skills that would improve their prospects. Communities that had once felt powerless against official misconduct now possessed effective means to protect their rights and interests. The moment when Kate had lowered her head in that throne room, creating the hush that moved the sovereign and shaped history, had become a turning point, not just for her personally, but for the entire concept of governance in her time. It demonstrated that courage, integrity, and careful preparation could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, that justice could emerge from the most humble circumstances, and that the voice of a single citizen, when raised at the right moment with the right evidence, could resonate through the halls of power and change the world. Kate's legacy was not built on grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but on the steady, patient work of building systems that would protect future generations from the injustices she had witnessed. Her story proved that true leadership often emerged not from those born to power, but from those who understood its proper purpose and had the courage to ensure it served the common good. The kingdom she had helped transform would long remember the day a blacksmith's daughter taught them that the greatest strength of any government lay not in the authority of its rulers, but in the wisdom and vigilance of its citizens.